Hello, welcome to my truly extremely short episode of not being an episode of There She Goes Again. Vow to improve. So I just went through some social media stuff, did a few clips, and just want to give you a quick update on where the world's at on this day, today, this month, this year. Right here, this was from, I believe, either LinkedIn or Twitter, and it says, looks like maybe Twitter. Um, Coronavirus gym owner fined for refusing to close in COVID shutdown. A petition calling for the government to prevent gyms closing as a measure to stop the spread of COVID 19 has been signed by more than 131,000 people. Coronavirus gym owner fined for refusing to close in COVID shutdown. The Merseyside gym stayed open despite the area facing the highest level of coronavirus restrictions. BBC News, right? Well, for one, these are my opinions. My opinions change from day to day, and my opinions suck and stink and are probably wrong. So, I only share my opinion so that you might consider it or not consider it, informing your own opinion. And opinions are opinions. They're the opposite of facts, or at least not necessarily facts. They're supposedly, we like to form them maybe based on quote unquote facts. And I'm talking about FACTS, not FAX, of course, but all I see around these days are lots of faxes. Our feeds are lots of FAXs going through and just scrolling out the spam messaging, just like used to come through on fax machines back in the day, and all we can do is laugh. But sometimes it makes us want to cry, right? So here's the thing that's going on, obviously, is these people are being fined, right? In a lot of areas, this isn't even legislated. It's like an order, a ruling, not even a ruling. It's just like, oh, I forget the word. So the order comes from like governors and presidents and people like that, right? Those kind of higher ups. And then there's the term for if it comes from like the public health organization that supposedly has some jurisdiction in that area, though it's escaping me what the exact term is. And then there's actual law, right? So basically the order and the public health thing are kind of like over off in their own world. They have some power, but it's sort of like an ephemeral power, or at least that's the way, especially in the United States, it's supposed to be. But yeah, it's not legislated. So if they're fining these people for not shutting down, and mind you, this is according to World Health, 10% of the world this month has probably been infected, at least 10%, with the SARS-CoV-2 disease, or whatever you want to call it, COVID-19, and there is just over 1 million deaths. So if you crunch those numbers, that means it's a 0.14% case fatality rate. And that's arguably not even a full CFR. That's just people who have died with it, period. That just died with it. And then the CDC, Center for Disease Control of America, themselves have said that only 6% of like that 200,000-ish number, only 6% of those people died of coronavirus COVID-19 alone. Don't take my word for it. Go look it up and let me know if I'm wrong, or if I'm forgetting something important or whatever. But yeah, 6%. So what's 6% of, sorry to do math. So if we say 0.06, decimal representation of 6%, times mathematical representation of the word of, 200,000 equals 12,000. So they're saying that out of the 200,000 number, only 12,000 of those people they think actually died of coronavirus, and not comorbidities that had a strong influence or maybe full influence on their death, because of asymptomaticness and all that, where somebody could test positive for it but totally have died of terminal cancer or something like that. So 12,000 people have, according to the CDC, have died of COVID and COVID alone. Okay? So I'll just leave that number there. And this is after nearly a year, just a month shy of a year of the, well, we could say like 2 months shy back when they said that, I think. Look it up for yourself. They, 12,000 people. So that's not even pandemic, epidemic, flu epidemic levels, honestly. I'm not trying to get in, there's nuances there, of course, that I'm glazing over, but, just to kind of put that number in perspective, every one of those lives matters, but those are the people who probably had, from what I understand, they probably had low vitamin D levels, they might have been morbidly obese, or age, that could have been somebody who was otherwise healthy, 88 years old or something, otherwise healthy, probably. A lot of that, that's probably what I would assume, complete assumption, would make up the vast majority of those 12,000. So it's just, and if you say 12,000, what's 12,000 of, like 780, like 10% of the world, right? So 780 million, right? Hundreds, thousands, millions. What is 12? So we need to do 12,000 over that. So 12,000, oops. 12,000 over 780 equals 1.53 with the e minus 5, so that's actually equal to, oh, stupid calculator, come on, you got a big enough window to slide everything over, don't you? So that would be like 1.5 would be 1, 2, 3, oh, it won't even let me do the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 1, 5. So if there's 1.5 and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, it'd even need one more zero, fourth zero, so clear 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 5. So the decimal was there and we go to the negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we multiply that times 100 times 100 equals, so 0.0015% of people in the world that have died with, or been infected with COVID have died of just COVID, according to the CDC numbers and what they've said. Double check my math. Always double check any math for sure. So, this would be tenths of a percent. This would be hundredths of a percent. This would be thousandths of a percent. So let's round that up to 2, because 5 rounds up. So that, if we could cut that off, that will be 2 1,000ths of 1%. So, this would be 1 in 100. This would be 1 in 1,000. Or, if it was a 2, this would be 2 in 100, 2 in 1,000, 2 in 10,000, 2 in 100,000. 2 people in 100,000? That doesn't sound right to me. So double check that math. 2 in 100, 2 in, then we slide over one decimal, we're at 1,000. Slide over one, we're at that. Yeah, 2 in 100,000. Every time I do math, it comes down to this. And I can't put the last numbers together. It's a very small amount, but 2 in 100,000 doesn't sound right, because that would only be 4 in 1,000. Oh, I'm so mad. I want to do this math all over again now. What do we have here? We have 6% of 200,000. That's right. Then we have, this was based on that 12 over that, which we got that number, and then that gave us the decimal percentage representation, right? Because if we were to say 1 over 100, which would be 1%, equals 0.01, right? And then we multiply that times 100, to get 1%. So yeah, that 0.000. It's that stupid negative number thing that this Microsoft calculator does. What do I have here? 780 million. And then they give us a 1.5 minus 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we had to multiply that by 100 to get back there. So anyway, that's the number I'm showing. I don't trust it. I probably fudged to 0 somewhere along the way. So I would encourage you, as just an exercise to get good at math yourself maybe, and get used to double checking facts, to go through and find out what I did wrong with that math. Most likely, maybe I'm not doing anything wrong, but it doesn't seem to correlate with what I'm trying to get it to correlate with. So it's actually saying that even less than what I'm thinking. So somewhere I'm off in my head, and you've probably already figured it out by now. But by doing that math and researching, it's simple little equations, but it's so easy to, once you do more than one thing with a number, it's so easy to just spin it around completely wrong. So with that, I'll shut up. I'll say that the numbers are relatively very small compared to the big numbers, the infection rates, and people who have supposedly died with COVID, not of COVID. They have an average, these are according to World Health, CDC, the people that we're supposed to be listening to, groups like that say you have an average of 2.5 comorbidities. That's, and 2.5 rounds up to 3, of course, but we'll even round it down to 2. Somebody like President Trump, he was over 65, which with COVID alone is considered virtually, just by your age alone, by being above 65 or 70 or whatever you want to say, that increases your chance of having severe symptoms and probably death, right? He beat it in a matter of days. He's also considered obese. He's over 30 pounds overweight, is what people assume, right? I mean, I think it's safe to say that with him. So he has other factors like that. He probably, unless he's taken a supplement, he probably has low vitamin D levels. They call him Orange Man because he wears the tanning makeup on his face, which is not that uncommon amongst politicians. But when you look at like his hands when he's talking, or when he supposedly had COVID, and you look at those pictures of him, he looks very pale, right? And so you can tell that skin tone of a white person is not the skin tone of somebody, especially during the late summer, early fall months or whatever, that is getting adequate vitamin. They're not getting out and getting that natural vitamin D from the sun. So I think we could maybe assume that he had low vitamin D levels as well, which a lot of people who end up going to the extreme with COVID, a heavy majority of those people, I think it was like 80-something%, maybe even more, all had very alarmingly low vitamin D levels. So he had all those factors going on, but otherwise he seems to be pretty healthy, so he had that going for him. And he, like I said, he knocked it out in a matter of days, maybe close to a week, but not something that we count as weeks, where a lot of people are, no, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's, definitely a fair amount of people that deal with it for weeks, plural, 2, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Usually the people who go that far have other things they're battling as well. The pneumonia set in, or they're some other type of a serious bug got them. And that's another thing too, with all the media, the social media, the internet, stuff can travel around the world at the speed of light, fact or fiction, whatever it is, and everything in between. That's, we're able to suck out of, close to 8 billion people. We can cherry pick these little things like electronically, and have these, these rare situations that might have taken days to, if even that, to get around the world in the news and stuff. And not that it's a good or a bad thing, it's just something to take into consideration, So if there's somebody who was like, oh, this guy was 25 years old and, he was on an intubation for 4 months or whatever, it's like, yeah, there's gonna be cases of that. You could find somebody who literally walked into the hospital, I would imagine, somebody who like walked into the hospital with like their elderly mother or something, and that younger person was otherwise had no symptoms of anything, and next thing you know they come down with like a deadly flu or something. Like there's always, we know there's all these crazy edge case instances of stuff that happens around the world. So these things are being cherry picked, obviously. Not that they don't matter or that they don't have some weight or aren't worth taking note of, but they're being cherry picked and shoved in our face, right? So we have a tendency maybe to consider the weight of those things disproportionately to what they really are. Like we're not pitting them on the scale with the rest of everything else. It's like, look up how many, I mean, you can't really do it this year, but you'd have to go to recent years in the past because they've skewed the data intentionally at the beginning of the year. They let people start skewing the data on influenza, pneumonia deaths, and those have always had sort of an overlap in numbers in the past. But anyway, you could go to like 2019 and prior, maybe back through 2015, and I'd encourage you to look at the data on seasonal flu deaths and pandemic flu deaths, and the more pandemic flus are measured in the tens of thousands, and seasonal is going to be very low and comparable with the numbers like I've showed you with the COVID numbers. So anyway, this person, the reason I brought this up is this person is being fined for not closing. Now they got everybody wearing face masks, and then what's next? Are they going to be fined for, employees that don't wear face masks, or for customers that don't have a vaccination, or this or that? And they're just putting all this pressure. For most of the year, the pressure has been put on the business owners themselves. That's where everything's going, like, oh, the business owners have to take all the liability of this unknown thing, which is ridiculous. And that's what they're funneling it all towards. It's not backed by legislation. If you look at what the people are saying, the little strategists of how to roll out these plans that are so politicized now, it's disgusting. They want to do it like that. They don't want to bring it into legislation because they're worried it will get shot down by the courts, most likely, especially in America, because those would be precedent-setting cases, and most judges, apparently, since America is still mostly free, tend to shoot those things down that don't stand up against the Constitution and are key documents that we have like that. So their strategy is to not go that route. Their strategy is to use big business by doing what they're doing, where they're shuffling these small businesses out of business so that it's just the oligarchy, the few handful of big giant businesses, especially technocracy related ones. And then those businesses can now take over and be the controlling arm. They can effectively be the government, because it's to the point where, like, oh, if a government doesn't like what they're doing, they'll just overthrow it. Like, if people look at the U.S. as fascist or imperialist, I think fascist is completely the wrong word, but imperialist, especially in other areas, I couldn't blame you. I've looked at some of the policies of the U.S. during various administrations as imperialist in other areas. Well, that's what's happening now to the whole world via this technocracy / oligarchy. And they're able to just turn, they're able to create coups, so to speak. I'm not saying anything specifically, or just rebellions of the people, which is almost like a coup d'etat in itself. If you just think about what's going on there, where you basically have the individuals are overthrowing the system above them, is, in either situation. And so they're using those types of tactics to carry out their strategy, and it's just disgusting. So anyway, when the vaccine does come along, like President Trump has said that supposedly that he will not force anybody to take it, which I applaud. Not forcing people. It should be a choice. If there's something that is deemed, what I'll say, quote unquote, lowercase s safe, because we wouldn't know for decades, and even then we'd have to wonder, it's hard to trust a lot of data these days. There's data, you can decide for yourself how to interpret it, but who knows? And there's a beauty and an ugliness to that. But he said he won't enforce it on people. Well, he's also not enforcing mask wearing at the federal level, is he? Yet we are seeing mask wearing all over the country for the most part. And we're seeing employees let go for not wearing a mask. My wife has effectively been let go from her job, even though she has a medical note from a medical provider, which, according to the governor's dictatorial expired orders that say that, these are the things you need to do to stay open, which have well overstepped their bounds, but this is a liberal state, a quote-unquote liberal state, so that will probably never be checked. Those same orders say if you have a note from a medical provider, then you're exempt from wearing the mask. Period. End of story. That's what it says. She has that note. She even asked her employer, she said, would you like me to get a new note because it's been some months since she got that note? And they said, no, this one should work fine. And now she effectively has no hours at work. And she was like a star employee there. And it's like, what? Really? So they can go, these people, what are they doing? We love these people. They're like some of the best employers in the world too, which is crazy. And they did allow her to work there without a mask through a lot of this. But now it's getting close to election time, and the pressure's really on. CNN and all these people are really, really pushing it, the governors included. And the pressure's full steam ahead. And so it's like, I'm not exposing them, but I'm not mentioning them to like point a finger at them in any way, shape, or form, really. I'm just highlighting the fact that these are very good employers. These are very considerate employers, even though you can tell from speaking with them that they lean towards everybody should wear a mask. They always have. They've never been like, oh yeah, we're, F the BS, who cares about a mask? They've never been like that whatsoever. They've been very stringent about mask wearing, yet they've respected her situation. And they've done that up until this point. But her situation escalated, and she had to take some time off of work because of that situation. And now that she's tried to go back to work after the minimum amount of time that the doctor said that she needed to rest and recover, now that's effectively been like, oh, well, So anyway, all that's to say, basically, that this is what's going on. That's mask wearing with, what I can speak from basically what I've personally witnessed. So what do you think is going to happen with the vaccines? Trump, like I said, Trump isn't enforcing this mask wearing, so the vaccines are probably going to be the same thing or worse, and by the time we're looking at seeing a vaccine, which is still rushed, anything 5 years is considered the minimum amount of vaccine trials. And we're now using brand new types of vaccines from a lot of brand new, or effectively, even if the company itself isn't brand new, some of these companies haven't even ever produced a vaccine before, even if they've been around for 10 years or something. So, more or less. So, there's a lot of uncharted territory here, and they want to rush it, plus or minus a year, right? And if it takes longer than 18 months, almost every pandemic in history, besides ones that are exploited every 100 years, which is what we're looking at now, they're done and over with in 18 months. If we don't make a big fuss about them, then they run their course within 18 months. And 18 months is, that's next summer. Guaranteed things will be the same or worse then. Same or worse. So, and on their way to even worser, to coin a term there. That's just my pessimistic outlook. I hate to be pessimistic on that sense, but in that sense, but that's the reality of it, If the glass is half empty and the glass is emptying and it's at the halfway point, then we really have to say the glass is half empty. If we're adding water to the glass and it's halfway, then it's half full, right? So we're in a half emptying state right now. By February, it's projected, I should say, not predicted, that 80% of businesses will have shut their doors forever. So when you think about that, that's an 80% market grab for the technocracy, for the oligarchy. They now have, where they had 20%, they now have 80%. They've effectively like nuked America with like a green nuke to where they can go in and take over that area without it being radioactive, right? And they are running like some Kevin Costner movie or something and staking the ground. So you have that oligarchy doing that. And wherever they don't is an opportunity for foreign business or businesses that, you know, weren't traditional business under traditional business ownership. These, you know, Chinese or whatever, I don't want to pick on any nation, but any foreign entity could come in with their money, you know, select foreign entities that have allowed themselves not to be as affected, or some other globalist faction has allowed them not to be as affected by this these shutdowns and restrictions, could come in and purchase up those businesses. So once Body Tech is ran out of business by either not having business or by having business and being fined into the ground over it, you know, then that space will become vacant. That will be one less gym provider in the area, all those kinds of things. So next thing you know, big giant global multinational gym place with, you know, virtue signals all over the place comes in and implants themselves here, and they set up a little station in the front where you have to walk in with your tracking bracelet, soon to be the mark of the beast, just embedded in your hand, because too many people are swapping out tracking bracelets and all the stuff we can project that will happen with those. So we just need to go ahead and tattoo your skin, and, you know, and then we got to do it in one spot, because if we allow you to tattoo your skin in any spot, then people will just have tattoos everywhere, and they'll be able to use different tattoos at different times. And, you know, it all funnels down to the biblical revelation mark of the beast, coincidentally. So yeah, it's going to be on your right hand or on your forehead. You'll get your little invisible ink tattoo that, you know, you'll get it in one of those two places, so they can scan both those places and make sure you're not using duplicate tattoos. And those numbers will have, those marks will have the number of his name, the quote unquote beast system, which I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with that number, you know. And when you look at these so-called leftists that are, a lot of them are pushing this stuff, a lot of them are in fact satanic, and they will openly tell you so, and a lot of them, and the other ones will claim they're atheists when they're not, and they are pro this stuff. They say, oh yeah, we're Satanists. Most of them will tell you they're satanic, but that they really don't believe in, you know, God or the devil or anything like that. But they're satanic, and it's about free will and whatever, and that's just like a pun or whatever. It's not true. It's not true. Most of them are practicing Satanists in one form or another, in one form or many, and that's a matter of fact. You know, I'm not trying to waggle a finger necessarily at these people. I'm just telling you off to the side, this is my opinion. This is what I'm witnessing, okay? So they're entitled to that. They're entitled to their beliefs, you know? That's fine. That's what, especially in America, that's what it's all about. You know, you get to have religious freedom. But once it breaks that golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, once you start breaking that rule, then that's when things start. That's when you hit the yellow area, right? It's like, yeah, you can do different unto people as you want them. There's, once again, that's your right, that's your freedom. You can do that. But once you're actually squashing people other than you over it, you know what I mean? Once you're doing what I'm not doing to them, where I'm not saying, go out and attack these people, hold these people down. I'm not saying to do any of that to these people whatsoever, and I'd be pissed if you did. Even if we know for sure they're like, hey, yeah, we're openly behind this system. We openly believe and worship this thing called the devil, and we hope you all die. Like, even if they said all that, I still wouldn't say, go squash these people. You know what I mean? I'd say, hey, take warning, all right? That's all I would say. It's like, this may be the route. We may be getting our heads cut off. That's the way it's going to go. You know what I mean? So, anyway, what's to stop them from doing the same thing if this person isn't issuing the vaccine? In most cases, I don't even think that's going to be a big deal because they're going to run most of these businesses out so that they'll just set up their own businesses that will enforce the mark and having the vaccine and whatnot. And the worst part is they're going to be like, they're going to work the vaccine they've already admitted. At first they were like, oh, once an effective treatment or vaccine's available, then we'll go to phase 3 reopening, right? And Oregon was totally at that cusp, except for a couple counties. Like supposedly they had to keep a couple counties in the red, like, oh, we don't know about these, but everywhere else it's like, well, we could totally go full open right now. We have effective treatments. Most people aren't dying. Oregon, I believe, still has far under 1,000 deaths to my recollection. I need to check that up again, but I think last time I checked it was like in the 500s still. 500, after over a half year solid. It's like, give me a break. But we're still mask wearing, all these businesses. We've now seen this stuff, like, because like that guy, I forget his name, the church guy in California that's remained open this whole time and been battered with fines, of course, hundreds of $1,000s in fines. And he actually showed, which a lot of these people aren't showing, these documents that they've got from the governors and stuff that tell them, like, why do you think overnight all of a sudden they have this little worthless plexiglass window in front of the cashiers and this tape at 6 feet on the floors? They were given documents. They were told, here's this arbitrary measures you need to take. And it's like, yeah, in some sense you could say, like, you could use them as guidelines. Like, remember, they're guidelines. Even a lot of these things that they call quote unquote orders now are really just guidelines at this point, and it's just, that's take it or leave it. A guideline's a take it or leave it. It's like a dotted line in the road. It's not a double yellow saying do not cross this line. It's a dotted line saying, hey, here's your lane. If you're going to drive, stay in it. But if you want to change lanes, you have that option. So anyway, I think that's enough for that. On these two, I had to, especially on Twitter, I have to copy and paste them over to a little window really quick because they'll update my feed every minute or two. And then the things I found are gone, so that's why I've got it clipped out like that. And then over here, we have Sunday laws are coming. Okay, this is what's going to happen. Mark the words, because there's the so-called blue laws, because there have been a lot of Sunday laws, I think even at the national level, that say non-essential businesses aren't allowed to operate on Sundays. And even the essential businesses, you go to the very few more conservative, traditional conservative, religio-political states, and like they won't even sell alcohol on a Sunday, And that's technically a violation of the Constitution because that law is based on religious morality. And that, that's like, well, a particular religion is favoring that day. And that's why they want you to say you can't have that alcohol. So that should be illegal, for one thing. I'm just putting it out there. And at least in the United States. But anyway, this is something, here's the guises we're seeing, and stuff is getting less and less truthful as we go on, as these power grabs by, I hate to use the word left because I considered myself a leftist for the last 25 years, and now I've had to abandon that term because it just does not represent me anymore. It represents this lies and deception. So, in my opinion. But anyway, Dhaka Tribune says, internet providers threaten 3-hour shutdown come Sunday. Internet providers threatens 3-hour shutdown come Sunday. The move is a protest against DSCC and DNCC's removal of overhead cables that are part of the city corporation's ongoing beautification drive. Okay, so if you aren't familiar, if you notice, like sometimes you'll see the power and data lines running on what a lot of people around here call telephone poles, and sometimes you won't, but you'll still see a lot of industry and commerce and housing. Well, what typically goes on there is that in more modern areas, they run the lines underground, and in the older areas, those lines were, of course, ran overhead. So you could roughly, just as a really bad estimate, say like it's a 50-50 chance of whatever area, more likely more towards downtowns, inner cities, like that, or just the core city, it's going to be like in urban areas, it's probably going to be overhead, and then in suburban areas, it's probably going to be underground. So that being said, apparently, some of these cities are. This is news to me. They're revising that situation and running them underground. Well, by doing that, there's probably a lot more limitations about when these, speaking in a more unbiased manner about when these companies, I would imagine, would be able to go in and just replace their lines and be like, okay, instead of running however many X amount of strands of fiber, we want to rip all that out and run Y amount of strands of this new fiber technology or something. But if it's, I guess, underground, even it seems like they're still able to just go set up a thing and pull new wire through. I don't see what the big deal is. But anyway, what they're doing is, this is supposedly something that the cities are doing, and yet they're going to hurt, I would imagine, businesses and individual private citizens by taking away their internet. It's like, oh, here, we're going to, that's like going to somebody and like poisoning their pets because they don't like what they're doing. You know what I mean? Oh, really? Really? You're going to fly that flag out front of your house? Well, I'm going to go fucking kick your dog on Sunday then, if you're going to fly that flag in front of your house. You know what I mean? What is that? That's not civility. That's not civil. Give me a break. And what day did they pick to do it on? Sunday. Sunday. This is all part of the power grab coming towards Sunday laws. And it's like, get people used to it. Oh, on Sunday they're going to do the 3-hour shutdown. And then they're going to do the numbers of like, oh, people actually went to the park with their kids on Sunday because they didn't have the internet, because we shut it down from them. And, because of that, families are closer now. And the utility bills, the air greened up, especially in places like LA, the air greened up, never mind the fact that they were driving their cars to the park or whatever. It's just manipulations. It's like, duh. Yeah, if you take a smog-infested city like LA, to spin off on a little bit more of a rant here, if you take a smog-infested city like LA and shut them down for even a day, it's going to be noticeable. Give me a break. That place is like the armpit of Southern California. I come from the armpit of the Central Valley of California, just on the other side of the mountains of LA. So we're like the yin of LA's yang, or whatever, for a lack of a better term. Like, we're the opposite side of that mountain range, and they get all the pollution from down there, and we get all of the pollution from up above. And it was just, it's always gross in those areas, period. So, of course, yeah, you take a very industrious state, a very industrious area in a very industrious state like LA, shut it down, duh, you put the fire out, the smoke's going to go away. That's pretty obvious. But now they're trying to get people to be like, oh, look, it's like LA 50 to 100 years ago. It's just so wonderful, and maybe we should shut down for just one day, and why not make that day Sunday? Well, this is part of the Antichrist beast system. Check it out, the so-called, right? It's like, this is what we have seen coming, and this is part of their thing where they're going to, this is an old Roman tradition. We are part of the lying down but not fallen Roman Empire that you can tell by our Capitol buildings, for one, all the basilicas and all this stuff, and just total Roman architecture. Our Supreme Court, all of our systems are all Roman. There's nothing, the Roman system did not fall, it divided into many little pieces. And that's what we see these days. And that's another biblical prophecy where it's like in the book of Daniel, it was described before Rome even, maybe Rome itself existed, but the Roman, the powerful global Roman Empire hadn't existed at that point yet. And it was predicted that system would, and it was referred to as the Iron Legs Empire of the statue that was the prophetic vision on it. And it very clearly describes it, and it describes that, the legs basically represent the two branches of the Roman Empire, which, if you think of like Constantinople, that was one leg, and then traditional Rome itself was the other leg that they split off into. At least that's the way I see that interpretation. I think that's pretty plain to see. And then you get down to the feet, and the feet were mixed of iron and clay. And that was to say the state we're at now. And that we're going to get into this state. It's still iron, it's still Rome, but it's not pure Rome in the old sense. There's this clay mixed in with it, and nothing's ever going to quite jive and meld together until all of a sudden a mountain unhewn by man's hand is going to fly out of the sky. And this is all just, this isn't literal, this is all figuratively speaking. A mountain in prophecy and prophetic visions represents a kingdom. Look that up for yourself. Waters represent seas, things like that represent people, stuff like that. So everything, a beast represents a nation. So when you hear me say like beast system, that means like a national system, whether or not that's a global national system or individual national systems. That's what it represents. You know what I mean? It represents that government entity. So that mountain that comes unhewn by man is supposedly the Messiah coming. And this is something that they want to mimic before it happens, or, as it happens. They want to mimic this according to the Bible, and according to what I'm basically seeing unfold here, is that they're going to mimic this happening by providing you with a human Messiah, that supposedly, not to knock anybody's faith, they're entitled to believe whatever they want, just like I'm entitled to believe whatever I want at this moment, which won't be for much longer, I can imagine. That, and I'm not having any ill wishes to anybody. I would hope that, all people can come to see whatever is the real truth, right? And so anyway, the idea is that the outside groups here are going to see this messianic figure as this human figure that is brought to power very soon, relatively speaking, that will provide us with these answers. They're going to bring us out of World War III and all of this stuff and all of this chaos that's coming, that you think you've seen it, you haven't seen nothing yet, and they're going to say, hey, we need to, for one, definitely have Sunday laws. Those should already be rocking by then. And all this stuff that the ancient Roman Empire was doing, all that stuff's going to go into full force. Basically, what we're going to see is a revival of that global empire. Because even if you go back to like the Egypt, Persian Empire, Babylonia, things like that, all those ancient empires, they're the same. I realized that when I was like an adolescent. Nobody even told me. That wasn't even part of my school text. I was just like, wow, if you look at it, Rome ripped off Egypt and so on and so forth. As you go back through there was always this like world empire that just somehow took all the secrets of the one before it and, picked up where they left off and just continued. And so that's what's going to happen. So it's, it might have been a bunch of Egyptians to begin with in one sense, and then it was a bunch of white people at the other end of the spectrum, but it's still the same idea. I mean, even those white people went and stole all the major obelisks, those big pointy things sticking out of the ground that actually represent a male phallic, if you do your history on it. You know what I mean? They went and took all those. And one of those is right in the middle of Rome. I'm not going to tell you where in the middle of Rome, but there's a prominent one there. And there's also a bunch of little miniature ones over in North Korea all over the place. You know what I mean? It's all the same stuff. These countries act like, just like how we have the Democrats and Republicans here, and they act like they're against each other. And yeah, to some minor degree they are. Across the whole country, the whole world, it's the same thing with all these countries. Yeah, whatever. It seems like they're against each other, but they're all part of the same big scheme. That's the way I see it. That's what I'm telling you. And they're all different flavors. You're drinking the Kool-Aid. We're drinking the Kool-Aid. I'd rather say that I'm not. I'm trying my best not to. But we're drinking the Kool-Aid, and all they're doing is they're offering a different flavor in every different little way they can. You look around the world, they're spinning things up. Oh, here, and when you get into the states within the United States, that's sort of just another abstraction of what's going on with the world at large. Short video, huh? Yeah, right. My wife told me never to say that whenever I start recording a video because it's never true, and she's always right. So when you get into the states, it's the same thing. What do we have? A bunch of states doing stuff a little bit different. All the states are doing, and that's the the Republican control style, which I personally feel like it's not the best control style in the world, but that's the one I prefer because I'd rather have a bunch of states screwing up to where, yeah, technically I could somehow figure out how to drag my ass to the next state over or something if I really had to, right? But if it was coming from the federal level, then it's like, oh, wow, now you got to try and figure out how to get to the next country over. And that's a lot harder to do. Not only distance wise, but, what's your criminal record look like, or what's this look like, what's that, what's your digital passport look like, all that stuff. Like, they're going to factor in all those of whether or not you can visit, for how long, and if you're going back. That doesn't technically happen, typically happen for states. They don't say how long you can visit and stuff like that, for the most part. So on that sense, I'm glad that, the states have their little powers, even though it's like, my state sucks. My state's kind of leaning a little bit sucky on that. It's a little bit more of a low-key, laid-back state, so it's not hardcore sucky like California or New York or something. But anyway, so yeah, they're effectively kicking the neighbor's dog here, and they're a 3-hour shutdown on Sunday. Like, what gives them the right to disrupt that service? Like, that is so screwed up. And this is just to get people used to it. They stopped collecting glass recycling for our trash service because of COVID, like earlier during the pandemic season. And which, like I said before, I call it that because they planned it out a month right before it happened, Event 201. You know what I mean? So I think I could say that without being some wild wingnut conspiracy theorist. It's a pandemic. That's not to say anything else above and beyond that, but it was definitely planned. Hey, coincidentally, it happened, right? But yeah, they stopped collecting our glass, and they said because COVID. So we're going to indefinitely stop collecting recyclable glass. I'm like, and I'm still doing that. Like, what was the point there? You know what I mean? Like, garbage people are exposed to garbage regardless. And so what you're saying is you're going to basically lay off roughly maybe a third of your employees? Is that what you're saying? And why don't you just say that? We're going to stop giving the people who collect glass a job indefinitely. And so they did that for plus or minus a month or two or whatever, and then they finally, okay, we're gonna go ahead and start collecting glass again. But until then, we are ordered to go ahead and throw your glass away. So what do you think that did beyond just those employees at the trash company? What did that do to the glass recycling industry as a whole to take a hit for 2 months? Give me a break. That has a rippling effect. So, not to mention, all these are the same people that supposedly back the so-called Green New Deal. Yeah, right, the Green New Diarrhea is what I call that. And I'm a total greenie. Like I said before in other videos, I don't own a car. I ride a bike. I'm a vegan, 100%. You know what I mean? Organic, 99.99%. Like, I am green. We are green over here. We've already been not eating bats before viruses were an issue. You know what I mean? We've already been not polluting the air any more than absolutely necessary for us and stuff like that. And now we got all these restrictions on us, that are telling us like, oh, you got to wear a mask. Well, why don't you stop eating meat? Because that's where all of these pandemic viruses come from, period. End of story. Go look up every single one of them named after a bat, a pig, a bird, whatever. All your viruses that you're so worried about stem from factory industriously farming freaking animals like they're some primordial soup, pitting them all together in a freaking little cages and stuff. So that's what I think about that. Come at me with your politics. You know what I mean? So that dude who's already been the real Greta Thunberg for half of his life is saying, what up? Calling her out on her BS or using a little kid as a pawn. Give me a break. And all these people, oh yeah, this little kid, yeah, from this family with parents that are openly satanic, for one thing. You know what I mean? Total globalists pretending like, oh, they're just a leftist that, back when I thought leftists were a little bit more leery towards globalism, not totally against it, but at least leery. And then I realized, no, that's not the case. These people come from particular virtue signaling families which you can see a lot of this, like the first forerunners, if you go back and do your own homework on the internet, all these groups and organizations that were the first ones to kick off with all this virtue signaling way before COVID, they're all the ones. And they go and they're like, oh yeah, we'll send little Greta Thunberg, like I've alluded to before, like the Wizard of Oz, up to that Emerald Palace to tell that guy, hey, this isn't right. But whatever. Sunday laws are coming. This is the precursor to that. They're doing it under a guise of like, oh, this has nothing to do with like any sun worshipping religion, even though the Sunday laws come from, that's what the term is it's the sun, dia solis, day of the sun. That's what that word, that's where we get Sunday from. It's a Roman Empire week name, weekday name, and we have dia solis, the day of the sun, the first day of the week. Yet the international government, so to speak, has changed this to the last day of the week. Effectively, they will think to change times and laws according to the Bible, right? This has been day one of the week since the beginning of time in all cultures, coincidentally, regardless of if they're sun worshipping or not. Then, even though sun worshipping is one of the most popular in the world, if you look at it, even Buddhism, anything with a swastika, sun worshipping, period. Buddhism, there's swastikas, and those swastikas on those statues are actually Greco-Roman statues, believe it or not. You might think, oh, those are so old and ancient. Yeah, what, plus or minus 400 BC? Well, go look at that time period. Go look at where those statues came from. All those, anything you see visually to do with Buddhism came from white people, European white people. Promise you, go fact check that yourself. And those swastikas that they put on there were symbols of sun worship. That's where that comes from. There's swastikas facing both directions. One's, it's like the yin and the yang, the black and the white, the good and the bad, and you can't have one without the other, and all that kind of crap. So whatever, if that's what you believe, fine. But that's where Sunday comes from. Then Monday is Moon Day. Mon means man. The man in the moon. The moon's the man. The mother's the earth. That's pagan tradition. That's all these are Roman weekday names. Then you have Tweesday. We pronounce it two, right? But that's really twee, or you can pronounce it however you want. That's if you go from Roman to Greek and back and whatnot. You can do the homework yourself on that. Twee is equivalent of Mars, and Mars, the god of war. Wednesday's escaping me, Wednesday and Thursday. It's been a while since, and Friday. I can't remember those. There's a Wikipedia page that tells you specifically who those days are. Because the Roman names are a little bit weird. But anyway, then you get to Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week, which is Sábado in Spanish, right? Sábado, Sabbath day. That one persisted there. But what that one's obviously been changed to is Saturn's Day, or short and slurred in Western, modern Western, Saturday. But that's really Saturn's Day. That's where that comes from. So that's from Saturnalia worship. And just like the so-called Christmas is actually the Saturnalia festival, right? And it depends if it might be called Saturnalia in like a Germanic culture or something. And then if you go over here, a few countries over, or cultures over, whatever you want to think of it as, then it's called something a little different, but they're pretty much the same thing. They pretty much have a heavy overlap. And of course, at the very end of those times was when it was changed to Christ Mass, where the Universal State Church wanted to bring in the so-called Christian people, which they were now naming as Christian people, which I don't think very many people would have used that term before that. Maybe some because of Paul's influence, but they brought them in and said, hey, here's where you can come in and we can all be universal and together, and you'll celebrate this festival, which is at the equivalent of midnight throughout the year. If you think about it, it's when the sun is at its lowest point, and then it's reborn, the sun sun, and it's reborn, and then the days start becoming longer again after that winter solstice, right? And you can go down and break it down. Like the New Year festival is effectively the same thing as the Christmas festival, the Saturnalia festival, all that. For some reason, we just decided in America, at least maybe a lot of other places too, I imagine, especially with Western influence, the way it's prevailed, is that we have brought over both of those. So when you hear like the 12 days of Christmas, it's a lot like on the other end of the solstices. You have like Juneteenth through the 4th of July. And I'm not saying anything about like slavery or about freedom and independence, but those days were there way before the U.S. existed, way before U.S. slavery, way before U.S. independence. That summer solstice celebration was still there, and it's roughly like maybe 2 weeks, just shy of 2 weeks or whatever. So if you go from June 19th, which is coincidentally about the earliest time the solstice can happen, to July 4th, which is coincidentally about the latest that it can happen, that gives you that window in there of like, hey, we're opening up the window of when, because of the flaws of the Gregorian calendar system, universally speaking, that could happen in there. So, and it's the same thing at the opposite time of the year, the midnight portion. That would be like the noon portion of the year, if you thought of a day as a year. And then you have the midnight portion. Well, for one thing, biblically speaking, midnight is, that's the witching hour, right? That has nothing to do with the Bible. The Bible says that the days start at eventide, and even is when the sun, the S-U-N sun, is exactly even with the horizon. So that's at sunset. That is not at midnight. That is not halfway between dusk and dawn. So that's something that has been brought in by so-called pagan cultures, and that's fine if they think that, but that has nothing to do. That's the winter, for the most part, is effectively the nighttime according to biblical-based religions. Like that, that there's nothing going on. There's no annual Sabbaths during that time. There's of course the weeklies still, but there's no annual celebrations during that time whatsoever. And according to one biblical calendar, the year ends right there, right where we're at right now. Basically, the year's ended, or ending. Right? Has it ended? I'm at a loss of where we're at, but yeah, it's basically we're at the end of the year now, the beginning of a new year, so to speak. But then there's also a biblical calendar that says that the beginning of the new year doesn't start till spring. So if you think about it, one of those calendars is effectively saying that the year ends right now, and the other one is saying that the year begins in spring. So according to both those calendars, there's like this slicing divide at either end of the more winter months. And then there's just nothing. There's no annual feast, no annual Sabbaths or anything across that time. So basically the biblical Thanksgiving, which is a week long, the Feast of Booths, has recently just ended. And that's where everybody goes out and camps and feasts for a solid week from Sabbath to Sabbath. And that's the biblical Thanksgiving. And people have been pulled away from that by these so-called Sunday churches. Not that they're entirely bad, but the thing is they've got people to say like, oh, that's all the Jewish stuff that was all nailed to the cross, that went with the cross. And there's nothing to really say that. I mean, there's, of course, everybody's entitled to their own interpretations, but the only thing that was nailed to the cross was the sacrificial system. According to what I gather, is that was the Messiah came down because we were all deemed gross, disgusting people that were trying to do these weird obsessive compulsive things, thinking that we're doing quote unquote good deeds, and doing good deeds or paying off the church for badness, that we could somehow get to paradise life, afterlife, by doing that. And the biblical Messiah came along and said, no, that's not the case. You guys have it all screwed up. For the most part, a lot of that stuff was just typo for his coming, to say like, you're doing this whole thing with these lambs and stuff, thinking that you're paying for your salvation and everything, but what you're really doing is you're doing a practice to foreshadow the real person who's going to pay the real sacrifice that's going to pay for all of mankind's salvation to come. And that sacrificial lamb is what will purchase your salvation. So your salvation is purchased, but you don't necessarily have it yet. according to the biblical word. You're entitled to your own interpretation. If you see otherwise, please inform me. But that's sort of in limbo. It's like we paid for something, like you bought something online and you're waiting for it to get here, right? So there's things you could do to avoid receiving that product or service that you've purchased. You could move, for one thing. It could be stolen from you. Like there's things, and of course I don't mean this concretely like that, like a one-to-one. I'm just saying there's things that could, between the physical representation of that and the spiritual representation of it, you need to think like there's possibilities that that's in transit. And yeah, there's a guarantee by the company that's sending it that says, hey, there's this guarantee here, but at your front door when that product gets there, there's supposedly, according to the biblical scripture, there's a Satan or a devil. And the Satan word is an old Hebraic word that translates to accuser, just like the one who accused Job, right? And then there, in the more Greco terms, it would be a devil. And a devil also translates to an accuser, supposedly. I mean, that's like according to Strong's. So that's why you see those two words interchanged. Of course, devil is out of Greek terms, and you could, in a more Greek context, maybe it might mean whatever, I don't know, but it's used as the supplemental term because the New Testament was written primarily in Greek, whereas the Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew. And you could say Aramaic, overlap there, but Aramaic is basically a modern form of Hebrew. It's been tainted by the Chaldean, which is why they're not pictographic glyphs anymore. Like when you see what's called so-called Hebrew writing in modern Hebrew, that's actually modern Chaldean. It is not Hebrew. It's been adapted to Hebrew. It spawned from Hebrew, but what I call Hebrew, that's probably not even technically the most precise term to use, but what I call Hebrew is ancient Hebrew. That's pictographic. It's not only is everything a letter, but it's also an image which represents the meaning of that letter and that phonetic sound and all that. So it pans all the way to our modern English. It's such a trip, the way that freaking ancient Hebrew has gone through, like Greek, you just flip it around. Ancient Greek, I'm talking about. You flip around ancient Greek. And then there's other little in-betweens too, even with modern Greek, that just show the transition. And then with English, you take the A, flip it the right side up. We use the A upside down, actually. The A, if you flip that upside down or right side up, it's called the all, and that's an ox head. And that's what that means. That's the strength. That's the leader. That's why it's at the front of the whole Aleph Bet, And then the next thing you have over is the Beit, and it's the house. But they've actually changed that to look more like the number 8, which came from the word hit, and which was a ladder, or no, was that a tent wall? I can't remember. I need to restudy this stuff. But it originally was an uppercase G figure. And that uppercase G figure is actually a tent floor plan, a basic tent floor plan of the entrance and then the master's chambers inside of a tabernacle. And that was the house. So you had the leader, the father, the strength as the first character. And then the second character, you had the house. And that also is the word for father, Ab. And then some later cultures added Abba for that, right? So Ab, that's father. And what we've done is we've just scrambled it, and not very much. Obviously we used the glyphic symbol for the bit, the B sound, which looks like an uppercase G, and we later in English, probably in Roman, in the Greco-Roman languages and stuff, use that as the gamma, as the G sound, because they needed a glyph for that, right? So they just slid it over and used it there, but they kept the second character with that B sound. But then they gave it the figure that resembles more like an 8 and stuff, which you can trace that all around in circles. It's really interesting too. And so on with the vast majority of the alphabet. Alphabet means alpha, beta. You know what I mean? A, B, all, bet, aleph, bet. That's where all that stuff comes from. So that's just something to trip out on. Okay, so yeah, Sunday laws are coming. The thing is that really the Sabbath day, the seventh day, what the Greco-Roman pagan universalists call Saturn's day, that was the original day of rest. But then they tried to say, oh, that's like that was a Jewish thing, and everything is always trying to be so anti-Jewish, right? So they're always the ones targeted with all this stuff, and I'll just leave it at that. Then we get over here. Bold statement alert. Breitling to offer blockchain-based registration and digital passport for all, capital all watches, and proposes platform to all other watchmakers. Huh. Wow, you can't even buy a watch without being tracked and traced in a blockchain, which is an unchangeable, immutable ledger system, digital ledger system, potentially global. This came from somebody, a blockchain partner at IBM, digital strategist, blockchain specialist. And so this fine jeweler watchmaker company is going to start embedding RFID chips or whatnot, some sort of like serial number system inside of these watches that will be trackable. And it says, blockchain-based registration and digital passport. So your watch will be tied to, it will be your bracelet, potentially. Provenance. Proof of ownership and warranty transfers have long capabilities that blockchain is well suited to provide for digital and now physical assets. Proof of ownership and warranty transfers have long capabilities. Huh. So that's what they're... I didn't even notice that the first time I read it. So that's what they're billing this as, is like a whatever, that this this will be used for proof of ownership and warranty transfers. But wait, what about digital passport up here? Digital passport for all watches. Let me see if I can get that a little better. My mouse drawing. Digital passport for all watches there. But oh no, second one, just proof of ownership and warranty transfers have long capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and cross those out, because not buying it. Like, yeah, sure, it definitely could be used for that, right? But we see right here what's going on. Blockchain-based registration and digital passports. However, I'm curious to see how Breitling, I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce that, are addressing the authenticity digital twin challenge to ensure that you can pair the physical device to the blockchain record. We did some great work with these people back in the day on this, but importantly using crypto anchors embedded inside the device. Crypto anchors embedded inside. What do you think? What would you want to see the term of functionality in a passport, a quote-unquote passport of this nature? Do you see this becoming widespread in the watch industry? Of course, this is the call to action on social media to get those responses so that the thing can boost, right? But right here, blockchain partner at IBM. That's who this is. So IBM is the same people who have collected census data. That has been their big killer app since they began, and that census data was used to identify and haul the Jews off to the concentration camps in World War II. And if you come down here into these hashtags, this individual decided to go ahead and post in here. We got IBM blockchain technology, innovation, future, supply chain strategy, IBM blockchain business, sustainability and management. Sustainability, huh? What would this have to do with sustainability? A blockchain and a watch? Like, are you kidding me? What's sustainable about that? Oh, wait, I've got an idea. You're tracked and traced with that. You now, instead of you need to wear a mask to have a job or anything, now you've got to have your little wristband or your watch or some sort of like RFID that is your ownership's identified on that blockchain, which is what this stuff was talking about, that proof of ownership in that blockchain. Like, that's not just to say your watch was stolen or something. That's also to say, like, hey, you've gone down with your old RFID chip stuff or whatever, specialized serial numbers or tattoos or what have you, and you've already gone down there and verified your identity, fingerprint, retina scan, and they're like, okay, you now own this, so we're going to put this into the blockchain, and we're going to make this habit for people gradually and quickly, starting with stuff like this. Expensive jewels, you don't want to get those ripped off, right? You always want to decide who owns those. So then this global blockchain, this will get it to be adopted because by rich people and whatnot, that people who have this jewelry, and then they'll that just like a gun registration or something, you need to re-register this. If anything changes hands or anything, that needs to be documented. So that will become an effective thing to begin the infrastructure of this tracking and tracing, and which cell phones have honestly already began. But this will be the next major phase towards not just willy-nilly cell phone, like, oh, I'm getting this one turned off and the next one turned on, or maybe this is a paid cash for a prepaid, kind of thing. Like, this will be obviously much more concrete, so to speak, than that. Goes live with their Ethereum-based system to put all new watches on the blockchain. CoinDesk. CoinDesk is rigged. I've had an account with them for years, plural, and they have never let me trade or deposit a single dime into that system. So, and they're one of the few systems that was allowed to remain for America. Like, before, CoinDesk didn't even exist, and we had lots of choice. And then Coinbase came along, or not Coinbase, I'm sorry, CoinDesk. Okay, CoinDesk I'm confusing with Coinbase. But speaking of Coinbase, CoinDesk is like a site that just reports news, to my knowledge, on Bitcoin and stuff, cryptocurrency news. And then Coinbase, confusingly similar, is an actual exchange. And Coinbase was the one that was pretty much one of the very few allowed to continue operation in the United States. And everyone else that I had been with for years before that, it just came along and said, hey, you got 30 days to figure out, or however many days to figure out what to do with your crypto assets. We're gone. We're out of the United States. They've imposed restrictions that are just impossible for us to meet, or politically speaking, we just don't want to be a part of it, and da-da-da. And so they all vanished. And we're left with, like, the only two that I knew of that we're left with that I had anything to do with were Bitrex or Bittrex and Coinbase, after all the smoke cleared. Well, I was like, cool, at least there's Bittrex still, because that was the one I'd used, and I was able to successfully trade coins and they still weren't allowed to have cash back then, US dollars directly deposited, to my knowledge, or at least I never did. All of my cryptocurrency that I got was mining off of old laptop CPUs and crummy desktops and stuff. Not crummy, but just typical commodity desktops, like years and years ago. You know what I mean? I just sat there and was like, oh, for so many weeks I'm just gonna mine up this cryptocurrency that literally amounted to like pocket change, right? For running these miners for weeks. CPU miners, not even GPU, or if I even did GPU on a few of them, it was like just single core GPU, just the kind of GPUs where they're like, don't even bother kind of thing. And this was when ASICs and stuff like that were just starting to take off, and even badass GPUs were kind of like at their peak. And I was sitting there just like, screw it, I'm going to just do the CPU stuff. And that was up to and through about the price of Bitcoin being around $600. Well, after that, obviously cryptos took a big jump, and that pocket change turned into hundreds of dollars. And magically, some of those hundreds of dollars just disappeared, and then it was like $100. And I'm like, okay, now we have like $100. Like, I don't know what happened to all this hundreds of dollars, but somehow it's hundreds have turned into 100. Whatever, I don't care. This was all just a big experiment anyway, because if I really cared, I would have invested money or figured out a way. Meanwhile, I was telling everybody that did have a likelihood of getting able to be able to deposit on through Coinbase and stuff like that, and had lots of money potentially to invest. I was telling him, hey, invest in this, you know. And it's funny because whenever I've said, like, really gone out of my way to say those kinds of things to people, and I don't do that all the time. I'm not a big, like, hey, you know, here's a good thing, and people don't really come to me for that all the time. Occasionally people have picked my brain on it, but those things, those very few things I've ever said, have blown the fuck up and would have been like some of the best investments if somebody was looking to turn $1 on. But anyway, I'm not trying to like take any credit. I'm just saying coincidentally that's been what's happened. You know, I look at it as more of a fundamental type of a thing. I don't, you know, so in a very few niche little areas I have that a little bit of foresight there of what's going on. But anyway, yeah, and then what happened with the Bittrex thing was there's been over this 2020 year, you've probably noticed, especially around the spring, there was a lot of Elon Musk scandals, and I couldn't believe it. I must have just not got enough sleep the night before or whatever, but people would go and try and say like, oh, Elon Musk is giving away Bitcoin and or whatever kind of coin currency and stuff like that. And I knew that there was a lot of scams. I get scams in my inbox all the time and stuff, and I'm always like, yeah, right, nobody better fall for this one. And all of a sudden one came through and it was just so freaking professionally done. I still to this day, it was like better done than any website I've ever seen, like ever, or the matched with the best of just like, this is how I would do my branding and graphic design and website layout, and the HTML and CSS, everything was just perfect, you know, like it was just so spot on. And I was like, I was just I was seduced by it. I was bamboozled. I couldn't believe it. Like, and I should have just looked at the .com or whatever. It was slightly off, you know, like .co or something. There was something that was like a total dead giveaway that like this is a scam. But I was so romanced by everything else and so taken by everything else about it that I was like, this is real. This is obviously Elon Musk, and the whole pitch behind it and everything was like legit. And then I was even thinking in my mind, I was so hypnotized, and I know technology. I've programmed programs that deal with cryptocurrency and stuff. Not to say that those programs are worth a turd, but that, you know, in my eyes, I like to think like, oh, I did, you know, maybe the graphical interface nice or something like that on it. But the thing is it caused me to do a lot of research. And a lot of people have known I'm kind of techie-ish and stuff, so they'll ask me, like people back in the day would ask me a lot about that stuff, or even if I wasn't into cryptocurrency, even if I hadn't read about it for a year or two, I'd be like, oh, okay, fine, I'll go look it up and give you an opinion on it, you know, kind of do like half minor consulting on it, you know. And so that caused me to get back into it and look at it. So I had been really in depth, probably a year and a half prior. I had been really into cryptocurrency, and so I was very familiar and up to snuff with what was going on. And they wanted Ripple, and they were like, hey, you send us Ripple, you know, some amount of Ripple, and we'll send you, you know, you send us Y Ripple and we'll send you X amount back. And it was like, whoa. And it was a way to like kick off digital currency and promote the use of Ripple and XRP, like stuff like that. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it, and I'm going to, it's worth the risk, but this looks legit to me. And so I took $20 out of that, whatever amount of money was left on Bittrex, and I sent it off to that address. And I'm sitting there thinking, and they even had like these little addresses moving across the screen of these people who were sending and getting paid. And I thought, that's really weird. They don't want my return. They don't want a return payment address, because with like Ripple in particular, at least, you have to send a return address. You know, like these addresses are kind of like, for most of the blockchain stuff, cryptocurrencies, they're like one off. You know what I mean? I haven't messed with it in so long, I can't tell you off the top of my head if like Bitcoin, I don't even know if they still allow it, but I think you could have a Bitcoin wallet, and if you wanted to have that address more solid, I think you could have a so-called wallet address that could be used more than once to pay back to. But don't quote me on that. But anyway, with Ripple, for sure, the modern Ripple setup, you definitely had to you had to provide like a generated return address. And I was like, wow, that's really weird they're not asking for that. But I was just already just so much of that whole, like, when you get that pyramid scheme thing, which I felt so immune to all that. Like, for so many years, when I see those things, I don't even think like, oh, maybe there's a chance. I just know they're BS, so I just can't believe I was taken by this. But anyway, I did it. I was like, what? I got to do it. I got to send this $20, even if I never get it back. I've already accepted that fact that this. I just got to turn it into $60 or however much they're going to give it back to me for, and see this whole thing work. And I sent it, and it went, and it got sucked right out of that Bittrex account very quick. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And then I went over to the forum where I posted the link and told some people about it. And I said, hey, you guys might want to wait on that link. And then somebody else said, yeah, that .com or whatever address was enough to make me wait on the link. And I was like, ooh, sinking feeling in my stomach. Like, yeah, why didn't I think about that .com address, Like, it wasn't even like Ripple.com or Tesla.com or something. It was like something leaning towards something like that, but it was definitely, it was really close. I have to admit, I think it was like based on RippleNet's address, but I think Ripple, like, just for an example, don't quote me, but it was like, if they're like Ripple.net, it was like Ripple.com or something very, very similar. And like I said, I was into it enough to where I knew that I'd never seen a Ripple.com, if that was the case. I knew I'd never seen this slightly alternate but very valid looking address in any of Ripple's stuff before, but I thought, hey, it's a new thing, like just totally making excuses in my mind. And yeah, so anyway, all that was to say that I lost that $20. Well, Bittrex decided, oh, you fell for a scam with your money. We're going to lock you out of your account now. And it's like, what? I mean, that's what I'm assuming, because all of a sudden I'm locked out of my Bittrex account, and I'd never been locked. I've had this account for years, and I've never been locked out of it whatsoever. That at one point they do the whole, the whole KYC, know your customer, and anti-money laundering AML and all that crap came through, and they're just like, oh, you got to verify your identity. And that's when I noticed things started getting weird. I was like, what? I got to verify my identity? Like, I've never had to get crazy like this with a credit card or anything, like a bank just glances at my ID maybe, like, I don't know, maybe they photocopy it now, but I just felt like, whoa, this whole know your customer anti-money laundering is going too far. If they really need somebody to turn over their records, if they have a reason for a warrant, then they should be able to go to these companies and say, hey, turn over your IPs. We believe that, this account has been doing money laundering or something. And so then at that point, with a warrant, they should be able to turn over the IPs for those times and dates or whatever that access that account. And then the government body that takes those should then be able to go to the internet service provider and go, hey, turn over, backtrack where those IPs came from, which is not too hard. You could do it publicly, pretty far back, most cases, without even a warrant, just as a regular civilian. So then they could turn around and track that, okay, this is going back to XYZ Broadband Company, and have them turn over, hey, which customer was assigned these IP addresses at these times and dates, and get that information and put 2 and 2 together to get that 4, and find out, okay, this was coming from such and such company or residence or whatever, whose name's on the bill. Okay, now we need to go knock on that door and start asking questions. And then it's, what I mean? Or get a search warrant for there and go confiscate the computers if it's that big of a deal or whatever, like those types of things. So there's a very quick and easy and privacy non-invasive route for people to still remain initially anonymous on the system. And then if shit hits the fan, so to speak, then for them to go in with proper warrants for the searches and seizures of information and go that route, just like we've done in the past. And for the most part, most of us are still healthy and happy with the old system. So that was the one thing. But of course, no, they're going to do it to where everybody for every freaking account has to send in picture ID, and a lot of them are even doing it where it's like a mug shot. You have to turn One place I wasn't able to do it, maybe it was Bittrex too, I think, now that I'm thinking back. It was either them or Coinbase or something, or maybe it was one of these online freelancing systems that we're all having to resort to now because we're not allowed to leave our house and have a job half the time, which I was doing way back. I was doing freelancing way back online. Like, that's how I established myself as a software programmer. Like, I'd never made a buck programming until I started doing that through online freelancing 5 years ago. So anyway, all those things slip in, and one of them, it was like I was supposed to hold up this handwritten sign and take a picture of myself and do all this crap at the same time. And I wrote back to the place, I'm like, do you realize this is physically impossible? Like, my wife hadn't been effectively laid off from her job yet at that time, so she wasn't home. And I was like, I can't even, without another person taking my picture. It's still difficult to do even with somebody taking your picture. But if you didn't have somebody else to take your picture, it was absolutely impossible to do this because they wanted like all these things in the frame and you taking the picture, and the picture could not be the slightest bit blurry, and it had to have exactly, like exactly a square or rectangular picture or whatever. Everything had to be like picture perfect, so to speak. So it was just ridiculous. And whatever platform that was, I think I turned them down on that alone. But then a lot of them too will say like, oh, you need to also provide a cell phone number, And it's like, what do you need my cell phone number for? That's totally invasive. For one, I don't use your services with a cell phone. And even if I did, that would just be using them with a mobile device that doesn't necessarily even have phone service, right? Like, so why do I got to provide you with my freaking phone number? Like, oh, that's unique, Give me a break. There's got to be other ways to do stuff. And there is, because I actually brainstormed over a year or so a system that would be a completely democratic, as far as common to the people system, that would require no oversight. Something basically like an evolved Stack Overflow, if anybody's familiar with like the Stack Exchange systems, where people get, I hate to say it like the social score thing, because I don't mean it in the Chinese sense of it, because the system that I envisioned, you have a social score on there, so to speak, but you can also reset that social score and start over fresh anytime without it being a risk to either party in the system, because you have to wonder about anybody who's got a 0 social score, right? So, or potentially negative, but anybody who would go negative could just reset, start at 0. So then you have to work up very slowly and surely to get that traction to where you don't want to screw it up. You're going to have to invest all this time and energy, like what I have to do now if I go into like LinkedIn and create a new account, because they constantly delete me all the time. I have to go in and set all my settings. I don't have to, but I choose to. So I go in and set the stuff like don't send emails to my account, even though this is a total burner email account, because I've already used all my real email accounts creating new accounts, because they banned me for being me, for being this guy right here that you see. LinkedIn continuously bans me for that. It's a trip. Sometimes I'm edgy, I'll admit, but I've never got one of those flags where they've like that the popular people get, even when I was popular, 10,000 plus connections and like all that. But when I never have gotten a warning. I've gotten my account where it's like, your account has been whatever because of a potential violation of the terms of service. Please verify your identity. So I verify my identity, and nothing in the email about it. I'm just back rocking and rolling, and I'm like, okay, and I just continue on being me. And then nothing would happen for like a month or 3, and then all of a sudden, boom, you need to verify your identity, potential TOS violation. And so I go in, upload my real ID again, and do that whole thing, and then I'm back rocking and rolling. No, it's like not even really a slap on the wrist, just like, oh, potential issue, of a type of thing, and now you're rocking and rolling. Nothing specific like it was this post or whatever. But I've seen these other people that have a popularity, and they actually get a letter, a message that says, hey, your post was offensive or found offensive or deemed offensive, whatever. And so we're going to make it so that only you can see it because it got flagged by so many people or by their system or whatever. And they get to continue having their account not banned, but they get a warning and the post gets hidden. You know, that never happened with me. So it's like, oh, really? And then they tell me now, like, if you want to contest this, go ahead and, log in and go to their little system and contest it. Well, when I log in now, it tells me you need to verify your identity again. And I do that, and then they instantly permaban me and send me a message that says, you're permanently banned, end of story. And it's like, well, you're telling me I can't reply, and you're telling me to come in and if I have any way to contest this, if I want to contest this, to log in and contest it. But you don't allow me the ability to log in and contest it. You allow me the ability to log in and get permabanned right again, So it's a ridiculous pretendo system of just BS. But anyway, I'm lost on tangents right now of where I was at with all that. But that's probably for the better. Probably going on like 10 hours of recording. So here's Antifa, right? Portland, classic picture. Almost looks fake, but this is, and whatever you could claim Antifa's a loose knit thing. I don't know. Like I said, I was a lefty, so I was familiar with these types of organizations. I was never part of any of them, per se, for sure. But not even back in the day. And I come in here and I notice this is especially back when the whole quote unquote Antifa thing was like really big. You see a lot of this hammer and sickle. And even before this latest wave of Antifa stuff, this hammer and sickle thing has been gaining a lot of popularity lately. And that we know is the communist side of the spectrum. That's the China-Russia kind of like system here. This is the anti-American system, is what it is. And I'm not saying there's not any positive qualities to it, but I'm saying this is who's funding them. This is what they want to usher in. Okay? And then I slide this over here. And then we've got this right here. We have this big thing right there. What are these guys doing? You know what I mean? What do you see here? Is that who you want to be? Is this the system that you really want to salute? Because it's one thing to say you don't like saluting that American flag, right? But it's another thing to say you want to salute this flag. So basically it's like, if I'm going to salute a flag, which I'm not, I would rather it was an American flag than this flag. And you can dig into the imagery behind these. Don't take my word for it, obviously. Go dig in. And tell me why I'd want to vote for that flag. Give me a good reason. Thanks for watching.